Here's the news. A thaw is on the way, but it's frost again tonight in many parts. And direct from Manchester, we've air pictures of the great lorry convoys still stranded in the Pennines. The Lords' debate on artificial insemination by donor, a government inquiry, our parliamentary correspondent reports. In the Commons, the two-day defence debate has opened. The leaders of the TUC have condemned the Cohen report. Sir Winston Churchill, the final bulletin. At the Old Bailey, Mr. Justice Donovan has begun his summing up in the Brighton conspiracy trial. The weather news is that a slow thaw is on the way. But tonight it's freezing again in many areas, and road traffic over more than half of England is still halted by snow and ice. Many villages are isolated, and some are reported to be running short of food. For a picture of what it's been like in the north, Michael Hancock reports on film from our Manchester studios.
Life in the north is standstill in Menzies. It's caused by drifts like these near Whitby. This is the first film to reach us from the Yorkshire Wolds. And further south, yesterday's story is repeated as our cameraman Cliff Summers found when he flew 50 feet above the blocked Manchester to Sheffield Woodhead Road. The drivers here have abandoned their vehicles and struggled through chest-high drifts to the nearest inn, and they've been there since Monday. Some farms and villages are still cut off. The other Sheffield Road, the Snake Pass, is still blocked, and the only way over is by covering 70 tortuous miles, and that's twice the normal distance. And now for a look at the same road, but on foot. This is looking towards Woodhead. On the other side of the Pennines there's Yorkshire, but you can't get there. This morning brought out volunteers, properly equipped, to search for the cars, lorries and sheep still embedded in the snow high on the hills. The queues of vehicles trapped in the jam look more like part of a city scene than a moorland view. It goes on, but these lorry drivers have to wait for the thaw and the snow ploughs. Today's bright weather has brought an improvement, but many villages are still isolated almost everywhere. Some of the most treacherous roads brought about by the blizzards were near the Lake District. Here on the Stainmore Road, the invitation to stop became Hobson's choice for very many. Drivers left their vehicles and made their way down from the moors, 1,200 feet above the sea, down to the village of Brough, to a still white but a more sheltered world.
But with the rapid thaw in the south and east Anglia, flooding has become the main trouble. One of the rivers that's been flooding surrounding land is the Waveney. The Waveney Valley floods, the worst since 1947, put large areas under 2 feet of water or more in Suffolk and along the Norfolk border. Hundreds of acres of grazing land are flooded. Some roads were impassable. One at Homersfield was under 3 to 6 feet of water, and this was Bungay. At Beccles, the yacht station was inundated. Parts of some riverside houses became unusable. The Thames, too, has been overflowing its banks. And over now to Buckinghamshire, where we'll see the effects of this on Datchet and Eton. The golf course at Datchet and other low-lying areas were covered as the Thames began to slip over its banks at places. The level was still rising slowly. The playing fields of Eton, underwater. The Thames Conservancy have issued a warning of extensive flooding if heavy rain should follow the thaw. The Lords are debating artificial insemination by donor. For a report, over to our Westminster studio and Conrad Vosbach.
Well, this has been a fascinating debate in which we've heard from 2 archbishops, bishops, lawyers, doctors, judges, and the whole overriding impression I've had has been of a great conflict of opinion about artificial insemination and overriding uncertainty. The Archbishop of Canterbury urged that artificial insemination should be illegal. The Archbishop of York said that though it was thoroughly wrong, he wouldn't make it an illegal offence. Though artificial insemination, he said, by a donor without a husband's consent should be grounds for divorce. And then our judge's view, Lord Justice Denning, he said that if AID was done openly, it was not an offence. If it was done secretly, it was in fact criminal conspiracy. And later we heard Lord Kilmuir say that at present it was not a criminal offence. Well, where the speakers did, I think, come closer together was when they wanted more information. And also there seemed to be general agreement that artificial insemination donors should in some way be registered or controlled. Most of the speakers I heard were against artificial insemination to some extent or other, but many of them expressed their sympathy and understanding with women who desperately wanted children and whose husbands couldn't give them a child. Finally, the Lord Chancellor, Lord Kilmuir, said the government was impressed with the view that AID without the husband's consent is a grave offence against the marriage. The government would set up an interdepartmental committee to examine what the existing practices were and what should be the legal consequences. And now I'm returning you to the newsroom at Alexandra Palace.
The Minister of Defence, Mr. Sands, has said that until there's agreement on disarmament, any major Russian attack, even with conventional forces alone, would have to be met with nuclear weapons. Opening the Commons defence debate, he said that otherwise the West would have to submit to defeat and occupation. To delay work on the missile bases in Britain until summit talks would do no good. For the opposition, Mr. George Brown said it was shocking to people outside that Mr. Sands seemed to have no other ideas for dealing with any conflict other than border incidents, except the thermonuclear weapon. President Eisenhower was asked about American unemployment at his news conference today. He said he was confident it will begin to diminish probably next month. If it did, then that would mark the beginning of the end of the recession. One of the president's engagements when he got back to Washington from his recent holiday was a meeting with the president-elect of Guatemala, Miguel Irigoyen Fuentes. But before he'd come back to the capital, the president had been playing golf in Phoenix, Arizona. Mr. Eisenhower's holidays have been the subject of a good deal of criticism lately. His trips hadn't caused many questions before, but American public opinion is now commenting on his golfing and hunting, which entail absences from Washington at a time when the American recession is causing a lot of worry. But once back in Washington, the president gave his views to a national conference on food.
America is strong. America is healthy. And like all healthy individuals, we have our ups and downs. I've been suffering from a cold. But we know that America is not always at the very tip-top of its form, and it is not now. Now, at this time, is no time to listen to the people who are men of little faith and of little spirit. Now is the time when courage, common sense, and soundness will prevent a slackness in employment and a dip in the economy from becoming serious.
In Havana, Cuban rebels made a daring raid on the National Bank of Cuba in the heart of the city. They tied up the bank's employees and set fire to thousands of checks, but made no effort to steal any money. And now from Cuba, first film of Juan Fangio, the world champion racing driver, after his release yesterday by the Cuban rebels who had kidnapped him at gunpoint from a Havana hotel. Reporters surrounded the car which brought him back to the Argentine embassy, following what the racing driver himself described as a most polite and luxurious kidnapping. His captors had told him that they had taken him in protest because the Cuban government had sponsored the Grand Prix in which he should have raced instead of trying to solve the unemployment problem. Nevertheless, huge crowds saw the start of the Grand Prix, despite the absence of Fangio. But the race was to come to a dramatic and tragic end after 7 laps. Sterling Moss in a Ferrari was in the lead, and ultimately he was declared the winner when at one corner the crowd tried in vain to scatter as a skidding car crashed into them. It was another Ferrari with a Cuban driver who was injured and taken to hospital. 6 spectators were killed and some 30 injured. The TUC General Council has condemned the Cohen report on prices, productivity and incomes. The TUC leaders say it's partisan and does little more than support government policies which have forced up the cost of living. The spokesman said it was difficult to see what point there was in the TUC giving further evidence to the Council. There are to be no more medical bulletins on Sir Winston Churchill. The final one, issued today, says he continues to make good progress. An X-ray of his lungs is very satisfactory. The American mediator in the Franco-Tunisian dispute, Mr. Murphy, has been in Tunisia for 2 days. He's already seen President Bourguiba, and here's film of his arrival in Tunis. He'd come there from Paris, and before that he'd had talks in London with the British government, who've also offered their good offices in the dispute. The press questioned Mr. Murphy when he landed.
What are your hopes for a solution of the situation? Always optimistic. Always optimistic. You've been in this country before, I think, haven't you? Yes, but this is my first visit since 1943, so I feel a little bit like Rip Van Winkle.
Now to another part of the Arab world, Syria, where there have been further celebrations this week to mark Syria's union with Egypt in the United Arab Republic. Well, the occasion was the visit to Damascus of President Nasser, the first president of the Republic, with the vice president, formerly President Kawatli of Syria, welcomed civic and religious leaders. President Nasser is in Damascus to consider the new constitution of the Republic and to select members for the first central government. Cheering crowds kept calling for their leader, and time and again President Nasser interrupted his talks to return their greetings. Rhodesia. Well, you may have seen film we had last week of the floodwaters bearing down on the Kariba Gorge. Our latest pictures show the Zambezi River now at its peak, pushing with relentless force on the dam that's being built there. Upriver, they've had a year's rainfall in a fortnight. It's no wonder they're now blowing up the dam to ease the pressure. This little footbridge is the only way across at Kariba. The road bridge was swept away by the floods. Work on the huge project's been set back by many months. At the Old Bailey, Mr. Justice Donovan has begun summing up in the Brighton conspiracy trial. He had been speaking for an hour when the court adjourned until tomorrow. He said the case was an important one because the charge against the 3 suspended police officers was that of betraying their trust by conspiring against the community to do criminal things, and because the other 2 accused were alleged to have taken their share in that common purpose. Earlier, in the first of the 3 final speeches for the defense, counsel for Anthony John Lyons, a Brighton licensee, said that if his guilt depended on the evidence of Bennett, not a minute should be wasted in acquitting him. For Samuel Belson, a commission agent, counsel said that if the jury didn't accept the evidence of the Scotland Yard policeman, well, that was an end of the case against him. Counsel for Charles Ridge, the suspended chief constable of Brighton, put 2 questions to the jury. First, were they satisfied that there had been one single conspiracy over the years? If they were not satisfied about that, all the defendants were entitled to an acquittal. If they were satisfied, then the second question arose, had it been proved that Ridge was a member of that conspiracy? If the jury were not satisfied beyond all doubt, Ridge was entitled to acquittal. Direct flights twice a week between London and Moscow will be starting this summer. British European Airways and the Soviet airline Aeroflot signed the agreement in Moscow today. It's a distance of just over 1,500 miles, and Russian technicians are to fly here next month to study the work of London Airport. Lord Douglas of Kirtleside, who signed for BEA, said he hoped the agreement would help to bring better relations between the 2 countries. The BBC announces that it's created a new post, Business Manager Television Programs. Mr. Ronald Wallman, at present head of the Light Entertainment Department, has been appointed to it. He'll be responsible for the corporation's business relations with British and overseas suppliers of filmed programs for showing in the BBC's television service. And that's the end of the news.